So we've learned a bit about the absolute joker recently. Most of that from Alfred telling Bruce what he'd uncovered in his years-long investigation into the billionaire. But also from the writings of Amadeus Arkham, the guy who started Arkham Asylum in the Absolute Universe. Well, a version of him started it in the regular continuity too, but we're concerned with the absolute version here. Now I should warn you that what we've learnt is far from clear. Neither narrator knows anywhere near the whole story. So much of what they say is their own conjecture, and so is unreliable and may change before the dust settles. Still, Scott Snyder wrote both Absolute Batman 15 and Absolute Batman Ark M, the two comics that contain these stories, and he's the driving force behind Absolute Batman. Actually, the whole Absolute Universe. So he knows all the details. And I don't think he would lead us down a complete blind alley. But he is keeping his cards close to his chest, so it's too early to take anything said here as canon. Let's start with Amadeus and Arkham. The structure of the story is a little odd. Not bad, and odd probably suits a story about the origin of Arkham Asylum. Essentially, Amadeus's writings recount a meeting in 1945, when a potential buyer of the asylum comes to visit. Amadeus was old by this time, and the asylum, though still running, was run down and half empty, so he wanted to sell. Anyway, so this buyer, who comes across as friendly and charming, is curious about the history of the place, so Amadeus tells him. His story starts in about 1865. The Civil War has just come to an end. Lee has surrendered, but Amadeus's father, who fought for the Union, hasn't returned. Amadeus's mother waits for him, just staring out of the window day after day. Then one day a figure approaches. His mother thinks it's his father, so she, Amadeus, and Amadeus's two older siblings run to the door. But it isn't his father. It's a messenger to say that his father has died needlessly in a battle that happened after the surrender. Distraught, his mother takes the messenger's gun and shoots him. She then shoots her older son and daughter. She was going to shoot Amadeus too, but something changes her mind, and she shoots herself instead. Amadeus never discovered what that something was, why he had been spared. So Amadeus is then sent to the Elliott Gotham City Orphanage. He emerges years later with a dream to build Arkham Asylum, a place to treat people like his mother, using the best science of the day. The Elliott Family Foundation gave him the money to make that dream a reality. So you might be asking, who is this Elliott family, who both gave him the money and had the orphanage named after them? We haven't been told yet. In the mainstream continuity, Elliott is the last name of Tommy Elliott, Hush, and his family was a rich Gothamite family, so it's probably a safe assumption that it's somehow the absolute version of Tommy Elliott's family. I'll touch on this towards the end. Okay, so Amadeus builds Arkham. He builds it on land where the British imprisoned colonial soldiers during the Revolutionary War because it was cheap. It's a place, he says, where much abuse and loss of life happened, giving the place the sort of blighted history one expects from Arkham. At the start, the asylum functions much as Amadeus hoped. Though there is one patient who is so vile and heinous that he threatens the very existence of the place. A grinning madman who murdered men, women and children before he was placed in Arkham, and two nurses and another prisoner after. Amadeus refuses to even name the man, and calls him Jack Doe instead. Amadeus's motives for Arkham seem pure, so instead of ridding himself of this man, this patient becomes the one Amadeus is most determined to help. The smiling buyer then changes the subject by asking if Amadeus has any children. He hasn't, but he recounts how, in 1885, he took in a boy that he then treated as a son. It was a rainy night when a boy covered in blood knocks on his door. The child claims not to know where the blood comes from, and Amadeus believes him, probably because, like Amadeus, the boy was an orphan who had grown up in the streets. So Amadeus takes pity on him and takes him in. He then takes him under his wing, teaching him about the asylum so that one day he can take over as Amadeus's heir. And the boy takes to it. He's clever and learns quickly. Amadeus also says that the boy believed in the good of the place, and so his fascination with the prisoners became a passion. Something else that turned out to be important. The boy would often say, "Tomorrow is a new page, Father," to Amadeus, to lift Amadeus' spirits. Amadeus thought the boy was ever an optimist, even when he met Jack Doe. The murderer taunted him and tried to get under his skin, but the boy was unfazed, impassive, and he stayed that way even when Doe escaped his cell and briefly took him hostage. The buyer changes the subject again, asking about a breakout the asylum had. It happened in 1886, so 1 year after the arrival of the boy. A guard had his throat slashed and his keys stolen. Amadeus assumes that it's Doe who did it, but he can't know that for a fact, as several of the cells were opened and multiple prisoners escaped. They then went down to the furnace room, dug a tunnel and fled. When Amadeus discovered the dead guard and the open cells, the first thing he did was run to the boy's room because he knew that Doe would target him. And, sure enough, the boy was gone. On the outside, the escapees terrorized the populace with robberies and murders. Amadeus tells the buyer it's because Jack Doe twisted the other inmates' minds, turning them to crime. In time, all the prisoners, with the exception of Doe, are recaptured and returned to Arkham. But not Doe, and like him, the boy was never found either. The buyer asks to see the furnace room, and Amadeus obliges. He hasn't been down there in the 59 years since the incident, because he couldn't face what happened, but he goes down now. Here the buyer points out that the walls have been re-bricked in 2 places. The one is a resealing of the tunnel the prisoners used to escape, but he asks about the other. Then, before leaving, he whispers something into Amadeus' ear, a saying we've already heard: tomorrow is a new page. Amadeus tries to convince himself that he heard the man wrong, but he knows that he hasn't. So, unable to sleep, he goes down to the furnace room and pulls apart the second group of bricks, patching the wall. There he finds a body, Jack Doe's, with a note repeating the same phrase: tomorrow is a new page. Amadeus then realizes that he has been played from the start, that it was the boy at the root of all of the asylum's troubles. He had been the one manipulating Doe. He had been the one who freed the prisoners. He'd been the one who turned them to crime. He did it because he was a monster who wanted to make a fool of Amadeus. And now, Amadeus believes, he wants to buy the asylum, not to heal the sick, but to create monsters, to make a mockery of everything Amadeus has stood for and wished to achieve. Amadeus can't have that, so he writes everything we have learned here into a journal and sends it to Captain Flass of the Gotham City Police, so that he can stop the man the boy has grown up to be, a man by the name of Jack Grimm. Then, in the same sort of despair as his mother was at the end, Amadeus sets Arkham alight, burning it to the ground, and taking himself and all the patients still caged there down with it. Okay, so what of the journal? As Arkham burns, we see that it's ended up in Jack Grimm's possession. We aren't shown how he got his hands on it. I suppose one could imagine that the Captain Flass it was sent to is an alias of his. A less salacious option. In other versions of Batman, Flass is a corrupt cop. So even though this is 80 years ago, and in an alternate reality, I would guess that this Flass is also just a corrupt cop, on Grimm's payroll, and that he gave Grimm the book. So that's the first story. The second is the one that Alfred Pennyworth tells Bruce about his investigation into the Joker. He says that the official story is that Jack Grimm V, the guy we know as the Joker, is descended from a long line of Jack Grimms, going back to the 1880s, who made and then consolidated their fortunes in various entertainment fields. So Jack Grimm I started as a child street performer who dressed as a clown to entertain the crowds. In 1888 he was recorded doing this in one of the first, maybe in the first, film ever made. That's 2 years after the escape from Arkham and the boy's disappearance from Amadeus' story, which is a story Alfred doesn't seem to know about, but we do, so we can surmise that it's the same boy. Anyway, these performances eventually earned him enough money to open his own theatre, which he called Just Kidding. So it had the initials JK, which are the same initials as the Joker's company, JK Holdings. Anyway, the theatre gave him enough money to invest in silent films. His son expanded the business into television, his grandson into cable networks, Jack Grimm IV into video games, and then the current Jack moved into online gaming and software and computer chips, which made him so wealthy that he's somewhere on the cusp of becoming a trillionaire. Something else that all these Jack Grimms have in common is that they have all donated heavily to charities, especially orphanages. Scratch a bit deeper, as Alfred has, and things get darker. The Grimms look like a crime family who took out whomever and whatever opposed them, and played all sides against each other so that they could profit from the chaos. Everything from supporting rival film studios, to funding both right and left-leaning news networks, to backing both the Allies and the Axis powers in the Second World War. They've also invested in some of the deadliest inventions of the last century: bombs, bioweapons, viruses. And it looks like it was like this from the start, when Jack Grimm I used nitrous oxide from a nearby dentist's to make the spectators laugh at his antics and give him money. So far pretty bad but reasonably typical. A crime family with an unscrupulous founder amassing wealth and power through the generations using unscrupulous means isn't all that unusual. Even if some of the secrets the family hides point to them being worse than most, point to them being sadists who torment and harm others because they enjoy doing so as much as because it benefits them financially. Doing things like after the first Jack Grimm was filmed performing for the crowds, many of the laughing crowd died with grotesque grins on their faces. Alfred guesses that the boy poisoned them with a type of strychnine on his gloves when he shook their hands. Alfred also discovers that the current Jack Grimm owns hundreds of tiny islands all around the world, and he thinks that Grimm traps his enemies on these islands, forcing them to struggle to stay alive until he eventually feels like hunting them down and ending them. And then there's the scale involved. Alfred estimates that it might be the biggest crime family in history. That is, he would if he believed it was a family. The most shocking conclusion Alfred has reached, and he can't prove this but he does believe it, is that he thinks there was no Jack Grimm the first, the second, the third or the fourth, and that there is no Jack Grimm the fifth now. He thinks that there's only ever been one Jack Grimm, him, the Joker, and that he used the children in all those orphanages to somehow stay young. But that he doesn't need to do that anymore because he's found some way, using the research done in his arks, to produce some terrible elixir that now keeps him alive. He thinks that the Joker isn't a man who never laughs, but rather a beast who is always laughing, at us, at humanity. What Alfred doesn't see, and what we do, is that this beast is more than figurative. The Joker, Jack Grimm, the man of stories, call him what you will, transforms into a full-on monster when he wants to, when he hunts. So what does all this mean? Honestly, it poses as many questions as it answers. How old is the Joker? At least about 145 years, but probably older. Remember, Amadeus Arkham went to the orphanage in roughly 1865. With his fondness for bankrolling orphanages, it's not unreasonable to assume that Joker paid for his stay, especially when you consider that the Elliots, or whoever was actually behind the orphanage, then paid for Arkham to be built. We know that the Joker wanted Arkham as he wanted to buy it. He did buy what was left of it. Ark M is its legacy. So Amadeus's whole story was probably part of the Joker's plan. Again, this is conjecture, mine rather than Amadeus's or Alfred's. But the same pinch of salt applies. So if this is the case, if the Joker was behind everything, Elliot could easily have been the identity the Joker wore before he changed to Grimm. And, like with the Grimms, he could have been the entire family line, passing the mantle to himself through the generations. Or the story might be simpler. Whichever Elliot was in charge of the family fortune at the time might have just been his ally or underling, or like Amadeus or Mark. If anything close to all of this is the case, it probably means that the Joker can alternate between being a child and a full-grown man in the same way that he can alternate between a man and being a monster, because a little kid opening an orphanage is, probably not impossible, but weird. Which all makes it impossible to guess his true age. He could be a man just shy of 200 who's discovered some horrendous way to stay alive. Or he could be some eternal shape-shifting cosmic entity who embodies chaos and revels in human suffering, in the mold of Stephen King's It or Lovecraft's Nyarlathotep. And with Scott Snyder, it really could be either. He's the guy behind both the Court of Owls and their enforcers, the Talons, who, in the case of William Cobb, has been alive since the 1800s, and Perpetua, who is the cosmic entity born at the dawn of the multiverse, who gave rise to the many realities within DC. So he has experience with villains from both sides of the spectrum. So I guess we're just going to have to wait and see where on that spectrum his Joker falls. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe and comment, and hope to see you next time.